My name used to be Khaled Al-Arazi, Prince of Bahrain, heir to power, trained to rule under Islam. But everything changed the moment I encountered Jesus. And everything I thought I knew about truth, about religion, about the world collapsed. I died once, not just spiritually. I stopped breathing, heart flatlined, and in that moment, I saw him, Jesus, not as a prophet, not as a distant figure, but as the truth himself. What he showed me shook me to the core. Hidden agendas, a spiritual, were bigger than any government, and the elite powers behind the curtain, using fear, technology, and religion to blind the masses. If you've ever felt like something is off in the world, like we're all being lied to, you need to hear this, because what I saw when I crossed the veil, what Jesus revealed to me, connects directly to what's happening on Earth right now. Before we dive in, I want to know, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I want to see how far this message reaches. And if you believe there's more going on than what we see on the news, subscribe now to the channel Truth from Beyond. This is just the beginning. You don't want to miss what's coming next. I was born behind iron gates, golden walls, and secrets. My name, back then, was Khaled Al-Arazi, Prince of Bahrain, son of the interior minister, nephew to the king, heir to centuries of royal blood and rigid Islamic tradition. People thought I had it all: status, wealth, honor. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the prison built into my name. From the moment I could walk, I wasn't just expected to obey, I was expected to embody everything: the religion, the monarchy, the national identity. I wasn't a boy. I was a symbol that had no permission to ask questions. The palace in Riffa was majestic on the outside, chandeliers imported from Europe, prayer rooms lined with Persian silk, marble fountains murmuring Quranic verses day and night. But beneath that beauty was something cold. We weren't raised with love. We were trained, controlled, monitored. Every prayer I prayed was watched. Every word I spoke was measured. Every look from my father was a silent command to submit. It wasn't just about Islam. It was about power, loyalty, control. And looking back now, I see it was all part of a bigger picture, a hidden agenda driven by the elite, cloaked in religion and enforced through fear. Even as a child, I had moments where I felt something was wrong. I remember once walking into a meeting my father was having with military officials. I was just a kid, but I heard words I didn't understand. Phrases like contain the unrest, neutralize dissent, international leverage. I froze. My father's eyes met mine, and the fear that passed through me was more than fear of discipline. It was the fear of knowing I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. That was the first crack in the illusion. I didn't have the words for it yet, but my spirit felt it. There was a spiritual war happening beneath the surface of politics, and I was being raised to fight on the wrong side. As I got older, the expectations only grew heavier. I was praised in public for being devout. My Quran recitations were aired on national television. I stood next to my uncle, the king, at religious ceremonies as if I understood the depth of what I was part of. But inside, I was suffocating. I started having dreams of fire, falling from the sky and a man in white standing untouched in the flames. I didn't know who he was, not yet, but every time I woke up from those dreams, I felt peace. A strange kind of peace I had never felt even once during all my years of mosque prayers and religious instruction. Something in me was beginning to awaken. There was one dream I'll never forget. I saw myself drowning, gasping, sinking in darkness, and just before I blacked out, a hand reached down, pulled me up, and whispered, "This is not who you are." I woke up sobbing. It felt like I had just touched something real for the first time, but there was no space to talk about that in the palace. Any mention of doubt, of vision, of questioning was treated as rebellion, fitna, and rebellion in a royal Islamic bloodline isn't just frowned upon, it's punishable by death. Still, I knew deep in my soul that my journey was just beginning. Something bigger than my bloodline was calling me, something holy, something dangerous. And the road ahead would cost me everything. From the outside, our lives looked sacred, honorable, stanos, untouchable. But behind the carefully curated image, there was a machine at work, a system of indoctrination so intense, so all-consuming, that it didn't just demand obedience. It erased individuality. I was barely 5 when I was enrolled in private Quran memorization classes. Every morning before sunrise, a tutor would sit me down with a whip resting beside the prayer mat. Not for punishment, he said, just as a reminder that submission wasn't optional. Every verse I memorized was another brick in the fortress they were building around my mind, and they built it with fear. Our schedule was brutal. Hours of recitation followed by mosque attendance, then theology sessions behind closed doors. We weren't just taught to love Allah, we were trained to defend Him with our lives. Doubt, they told us, is the first door the devil walks through. I started to believe it. Every time a question crept into my mind about the contradictions, about the verses that called for violence, I pushed it down, hard. I was scared not just of disappointing my father, but of burning in hell. I was told that even thinking certain things made me an enemy of Islam. And in a royal family, that meant you were also an enemy of the state. But here's what no one tells you about indoctrination. It's not just what they teach you, it's what they don't let you feel. I wasn't allowed to feel sadness, or loneliness, or fear. If I did, I was told to pray harder. If I didn't feel close to Allah, it was because I wasn't holy enough. Every emotional wound was treated with more rules, more guilt, more surveillance. And all the while, the truth was buried under layers of ritual. Looking back, I see it now. The elite that shaped our education didn't want us to know God. They wanted us to obey an idea of God, one that served their political structure. It wasn't about salvation. It was about control. Control masked as piety. Deception masked as devotion. And there were whispers. Things said in low voices between the palace walls. Talk about how certain clerics were being funded by foreign regimes. How political alliances were made not based on morality, but on global power dynamics. How Islam was sometimes weaponized to silence dissent or rally support for wars we never fought ourselves. I didn't understand the full scope back then, but I felt the tension, like a current under the surface. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And still, I obeyed. I played my role, I bowed my head, I recited the verses. But there were nights when I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, and whispered, God, if you're real, please, show me the truth. And slowly, something began to stir. Something not of this world. It didn't come through the Quran or the mosque. It didn't come through lectures or lineage. It came like a breeze, a presence, a soft ache in the chest that would return in my quietest moments. I couldn't name it yet, but I knew this. It didn't demand, it didn't threaten, it called. And even as I tried to drown it in tradition, I knew that call wasn't going away. Because somewhere beyond the veil of religion and royalty, beyond the rituals and rules, beyond the weight of my birthright, someone was waiting. And soon, I would meet him, not through study or ceremony, but through a near-death experience that would expose the spiritual war I'd been born into. And introduce me to the only one who could save me, Jesus. By the time I was in my late teens, I had become a national icon. At least, that's what they called me. The young lion of Islam, they'd say on state television. Videos of me leading youth prayers went viral across the Gulf. Clerics praised my recitations. Foreign diplomats shook my hand. But what they didn't know, what I was terrified anyone would find out, was that every night, when the cameras were gone and the palace halls fell, silent, I would lie awake asking myself a single question. What if they're all wrong? It started with a verse, Surah Al-Anfal, verse 12. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve, strike above their necks. I remember reading it one night in my private study, just days after attending a public ceremony where I had to bless the military. Something cracked in me. The words didn't sound holy. They sounded cruel, cold. I tried to justify it. I tried to say it was contextual, like they taught us. But my spirit, my soul, begged to differ. I felt something I was never allowed to feel. Conviction. Not the religious kind, but the kind that whispers, this isn't who you are. It was the beginning of my awakening. But doubts in my world were dangerous, lethal. So I played my part. I smiled. I prayed louder. I studied harder. But deep inside, fear and guilt began to eat away at me. Not fear of God, but fear of never knowing Him. My prayers felt hollow. My fasting felt performative. My sermons began to feel like lies stitched together with political slogans. And yet, I had no one to turn to. Who could I talk to? My father? The man who once beat my cousin bloody for skipping a single prayer? The imams? They were part of the same system. I was trapped in a palace made of gold and shame, surrounded by power, isolated by deception. There was one night, I'll never forget it. I was in the courtyard, past midnight, alone. The moon was full, and I remember looking up and whispering, God, where are you? Are you even listening? And then the silence hit me harder than any answer could have. It wasn't that he was absent. It was that I realized I'd never actually known him. I had known religion, I had known ritual, I had known punishment and fear and expectations. But love, peace, presence, I didn't even know what those felt like. I was a prince by blood, but spiritually, I was homeless, and something inside me knew there was more. Truth, hidden behind generations of tradition, locked behind fear, guarded by men too scared to look beyond the veil. And then came the dreams. Night after night, I started seeing a man dressed in white. He never spoke, but he would stand beside me in places of chaos, mosques turned to rubble, cities burning, leaders shouting from behind thrones. And every time, his presence brought peace. I didn't know who he was, but every time I woke up, I felt like I had touched something holy, something real. The dreams haunted me, but not with fear, with longing. And deep down I knew this wasn't imagination, this wasn't sleep, this was a revelation. And what scared me most was how beautiful it felt. It all started with a sound, soft, barely audible. I was walking through one of the guest wings in the palace, late at night, when I heard something coming from the quarters of one of the Filipino housemaids. It wasn't Quran, it wasn't Arabic. It was singing, in English. And for some reason, I froze. I leaned closer to the door. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. The words hit me like a wave. I didn't understand why, but my heart tightened. My chest burned. It felt like home. I walked away quickly, afraid someone might see me. But that moment, that sound, was the crack in the wall I had spent my whole life pretending wasn't there. I started searching, secretly, cautiously. At first it was just curiosity, but soon it turned into hunger. I found Christian sermons online late at night using a hidden device I kept under a floor panel. American pastors, Egyptian ex-Muslims, even old grainy footage of underground churches in the Middle East. And then I found him, Jesus. Not the Isa they taught me in Islam, the prophet who would one day return to break crosses and destroy Christianity. No, this Jesus was different. He spoke of love, of truth, of peace. Not conditional, not performative. Unrelenting love. Scandalous grace. It felt dangerous. But it also felt like water in a desert I didn't even know I was dying in. The dreams intensified. I started seeing the man in white again. But this time, he spoke. I would find myself standing in the ruins of a mosque, surrounded by shouting voices. And he would say, "Come to me. I am the way." And I'd wake up shaking, sweating, crying. I was torn. Every part of my upbringing screamed at me, this is deception. This is how the devil lures people into blasphemy. But everything in my soul whispered back, this is truth. In one dream, he touched my chest, and instantly I saw flashes. Wars, secret meetings, corrupted leaders bowing to dark forces, and behind them all, a serpent with many crowns. It wasn't just religion. It was a spiritual war, woven into the fabric of the world, and most people couldn't see it. I was being shown what they wanted hidden. I remember the night I opened a Bible for the first time. A digital version, of course. I wouldn't dare bring a real one into the palace. I went straight to the Gospel of John. And there it was. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I couldn't breathe. I had memorized hundreds of verses from the Quran, but nothing had ever felt like this. The words didn't just inform, they pierced. It was like someone had lit a fire in the deepest part of me. That night, I broke down. I knelt on the floor and whispered, Jesus, if you're real, please show me. And I felt something I'd never felt in my life. Peace, not silence, not guilt. Peace. The kind of peace you don't earn, the kind you receive. Undeserved, unexplainable. But peace didn't mean safety, because the more I searched for truth, the closer the darkness came. I started noticing things, my devices being tampered with, questions from palace staff that felt too scripted. One of my cousins even warned me, softly in passing, that I should stop reading foreign things. That's when I knew my time was running out. I had touched something holy, something real. But now I was on borrowed time. The same Jesus who had brought me peace had also awakened me to the cost of truth in a world built on lies. And the confrontation that would change my life forever was coming. I still remember the moment they found out. It was early morning, before the sun even rose. I was woken by a loud slam. My door flung open, and my uncle stood there, flanked by 2 palace guards. His eyes were fire. On the desk beside my bed, my secret phone lay open, paused on a Christian sermon in Arabic. I had fallen asleep the night before listening to it. Too tired, too careless. And that mistake would cost me everything. "You dishonor your name, you dishonor your blood, you dishonor Allah," my uncle shouted. My father didn't even speak. He just stared at me, cold, silent, like I was already dead to him. Within hours, the council had been called, not just family, religious leaders, political figures, even a military advisor or two. They said it was a tribunal, but it wasn't justice. It was a warning, a ritual of humiliation. I was accused of apostasy, of betrayal, of spiritual treason. They asked me over and over if I had accepted Jesus. I didn't answer, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew whatever I said, I was already condemned. One cleric leaned in and whispered, "You've invited demons. They're already inside you." That's when I realized they weren't just trying to save me. They were trying to erase me. They stripped me of my title. My bank accounts were frozen. My name was erased from royal records. And then came the beatings. Not from strangers, but from cousins, brothers, blood. They said it was for my own good, to break the curse, to bring me back to Islam. But every fist, every boot, every kick only made one thing clearer. They feared the truth I had seen. It wasn't just about religion, it was about control. A crack in one stone could threaten the whole foundation. My transformation wasn't just personal, it exposed a lie. They all depended on the hidden agenda behind the religion, behind the family, behind the state. And for that, I had to be silenced. For days, I was locked in a room beneath the palace. No windows, no clocks, no contact. They brought in a sheikh trained in psycho-spiritual correction. He sat across from me and quoted Quran while blowing incense in my face, trying to cast out what he called the Christian spirit. I sat there, battered and bruised, and whispered prayers to Jesus under my breath. He didn't leave me, not for a second. I felt him there, calm, strong, unshaken, while everything around me raged. That's when I understood. Jesus doesn't just rescue us from hell after death. He walks into hell with us while we're still alive. I wasn't alone, not anymore. Eventually, they realized I wouldn't break, that they couldn't reach me anymore, and that's when they made the final decision. Total exile. I was told I would be sent away in silence with no explanation to the public, no funeral, no news, just erased. I wasn't even allowed to take clothes, just a plain robe, no documents, no phone, just nothing. But what they didn't realize is that in taking everything, they gave me something far more powerful. Freedom. They thought they were sending me to die, but they didn't know I'd already died and been reborn. The next chapter of my story would begin in shadows, but what waited for me there was light. The night I escaped Bahrain, the air felt different. Heavy, electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. I had one chance. One. A Christian contact I had met online through an encrypted chat connected me with a foreign NGO worker who had diplomatic clearance. That man risked his life for me. We had just 20 minutes to act. I wore a disguise, dark skin tone makeup, contact lenses, peasant clothes. The hardest part wasn't getting past security, it was walking past the royal guards I'd grown up with, men who used to salute me. I kept my head down. My heart pounded like a war drum. Every step felt like betrayal. But in reality, it was deliverance. We crossed into Saudi Arabia under a fake name, riding in the trunk of a diplomatic vehicle, hidden beneath layers of forged documents and humanitarian supplies. For over 14 hours, I didn't breathe properly. We passed multiple checkpoints, and I could hear guards outside joking, laughing, sipping tea. They had no idea a former prince was hiding under their noses. I kept whispering, "Jesus, cover me, hide me in plain sight." And he did. We slipped through every barrier like ghosts. It was as if heaven had assigned angels to ride shotgun. Looking back, I know it wasn't just strategy. It was supernatural protection. A spiritual war was playing out in the natural. In Jordan, I stayed in a safe house run by believers, Arabs like me, former Muslims, men and women who had also walked away from everything for the sake of truth. They treated me like family. Not royalty, family. It was strange and beautiful. We ate together. We prayed together. For the first time, I heard worship that wasn't performance. People cried in the presence of God, not out of fear, but out of love. I felt free. Terrified, yes, but free. They didn't care about my past. They only cared about my soul. And for the first time in my life, I felt what no palace, no ceremony, no Quranic memorization had ever given me. Peace that passed understanding. Cyprus was the final destination. With the help of a Christian legal organization, I was granted emergency asylum. I had no passport, no real documents, just the word of those who had witnessed my journey. And somehow, the government approved it. It made no sense in the natural, but in the spirit, it was a revelation. Jesus was making a way through impossible places. Like Moses crossing the sea, I was walking through walls that had been built to trap me, and each step I took was an act of war, against the elite systems of control, against spiritual deception, and against the shame that had been drilled into me since childhood. But freedom, I learned, isn't just escape. It's the beginning of a new identity. My old name was gone, my title stripped, my homeland closed to me forever. But in the ashes of what I lost, something eternal began to rise. The journey wasn't over, it had just begun. Because in Cyprus, I would be given a new name, a new life. And in baptism, I wouldn't just survive, I would be reborn. What I had seen, what I had lived through, wasn't just for me. It was a message, a warning, a light for others who are still trapped in the shadows, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. I'll never forget the moment I went under the water. The waves of the Mediterranean crashed softly in the distance, but all I could hear was my own breath, shaking, uncertain, yet alive. I stood in the baptism pool, surrounded by strangers who had become brothers. My body trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. Surrender. When I came up from that water, I was no longer Prince Khaled al-Aratsi. I was Luke Elias Khaled, a name that meant light, God is salvation, and a remembrance of where I came from. It was more than symbolic. It was resurrection. The old man had died long before. This was the birth of someone new. Life didn't become easier after that. I didn't suddenly get everything back. In fact, I had nothing. No money, no citizenship, no family. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I needed those things. The palace had given me identity through blood and fear, but Jesus gave me identity through grace and truth. I wasn't defined by loyalty to a throne. I was now part of a kingdom not built by human hands. One no elite could control, no cleric could censor, and no ruler could revoke. My new life wasn't built on ritual or politics. It was built on relationship, real, unshakable, divine. I began to read scripture like a starving man eats, every page of the Bible undid. Years of indoctrination. I saw clearly for the first time that the truth was never meant to be locked inside religion. The gospel was liberation, not just from sin, but from systems. I had lived inside a spiritual war, and most of the world still was. The deception ran deep, through governments, religions, media, even false peace treaties. I had been part of it without even knowing. But now I saw. The blindfold was off. And what Jesus showed me wasn't just about my story. It was about the condition of the world and the urgency of awakening. There were days I wept in my small room in Cyprus, not because I was alone, but because I realized how close I had come to dying in chains. If I had stayed in that palace, I would have lived like a king and died in spiritual poverty. But instead, I lost everything and found life. Jesus didn't just offer me comfort, he offered me purpose, redemption, calling. And even in my trauma, even in the exile, even in the moments where I missed my younger siblings or the gardens of Rifa, I never once regretted choosing him. Because what I found in Christ wasn't temporary, it was eternal. And nothing could take it from me. This wasn't the end. In fact, it felt like I had only just stepped onto the battlefield. Now that I knew the truth, I couldn't keep it to myself. The same revelation that had set me free was meant to set others free too, especially those who, like me, were raised under heavy chains masked as holy robes. I didn't know where the path would lead, but I knew who was leading it, and I knew his voice. The same voice that had called me in my dreams, that had stood beside me in darkness, that had pulled me from drowning. Jesus, my Savior, my King, my home. When you lose everything, you find out who you really are, and when you've met Jesus in the middle of your own ashes, there's only one thing you want to do after: go back into the fire for someone else. That's what I do now. I live in a small apartment, not a palace. I walk through refugee camps, not marble halls. I sit with men and women who look like I used to, tired, confused, angry, full of fear, but also longing for truth. I speak to them in Arabic, not to convert, but to witness, to say, I've been there, and you're not alone. I help translate Christian materials into Arabic. I send resources to secret believers. I record my story for the underground church. Every time I speak, I know I'm taking a risk. Bahrain still has my name on a list. Some days, I receive threats, messages from anonymous sources warning me to repent back to Islam or else. But I don't flinch, because I already died once. And what I came back with wasn't fear, it was fire. This isn't just testimony, this is spiritual war. And the war isn't against people, it's against systems, spirits, lies. against the deception that keeps millions bound while pretending to set them free. Sometimes people ask me if I hate my family, if I'd ever return to face them. And I say this with tears in my eyes. I love them. I pray for them by name. I ask Jesus to visit them like he visited me, in dreams and whispers and unexplainable peace. I forgive them, all of them, even the ones who hit me, even the ones who spit in my face, because I know they're trapped in the same illusion I was. They're fighting for a kingdom that's crumbling. But the kingdom I now belong to, it cannot be shaken. That's the revelation I carry every day. I've spoken with ex-imams, former radicals, abused women, gay teens kicked out by their families, all searching for the same thing: love that doesn't lie, truth that isn't used as a weapon, a God who doesn't need to be defended by violence. And I point them all to the same person, Jesus. Not religion, not Western culture, just Jesus. The one who met me in a dream, the one who walked through the flames with me, the one who still speaks to me. And when I look in their eyes and see their walls begin to break, I know. This is my calling now. This is why I lived. I may never go home again, not in this life, but I've found a greater home. I walk with nothing in my hands but truth, and I carry it into places the world has forgotten. Because there are still millions living under thrones, ideologies, and flags that promise peace, but deliver bondage, and they don't know that the door is already open, that awakening is possible, that the same man in white who saved me is calling their names too. And that's why I speak. That's why I risk. That's why I won't stop. Because if he came for a prince, he'll come for anyone. Now that you've heard my story, I want to hear yours. Have you ever had a moment, dream, vision, or crisis where you felt like something bigger was calling you? Like the veil was lifting for just a second and the world wasn't what it seemed? Tell me in the comments. I want to read your story. And if any part of this message spoke to your spirit, subscribe now to Truth from Beyond and turn on notifications. There are more revelations coming, more stories like mine, more truth that's been hidden for too long. The next video that's showing on your screen, watch it. What you'll hear might confirm the very thing your soul has been feeling, but couldn't explain. I'm Luke Elias Khaled. Thank you for listening. And remember, when you start searching for truth, it always finds you.